Okay, guys. So our homework assignment for last night was textbook scavenger hunt, chapter 6, section 1, on the eve of revolution. Um, Started on page 572. It looks like this. If I can scroll up here. Okay, I can't scroll for some reason. All right. So we're going to answer these questions one by one. I'll be flipping back and forth. Hopefully that doesn't mess you guys up too bad. The first question is, what was the Ancien regime? The Ancien regime, or the ancient regime. So, on April 28, 1789, unrest exploded at a Paris wallpaper factory. A rumor had spread that the factory owner was planning to cut wages, even though bread prices were soaring. Enraged workers vandalized the owner's home. Riots like these did not worry most nobles. They knew that France had faced a severe economic crisis. Wow, why is this being so difficult? But thought financial reforms would ease the problem. The nobles were wrong. The crisis went deeper than government finances. Reform would not be enough. By July, the hungry, unemployed, and poorly paid people of Paris had taken up arms. Their actions would push events further and further than anyone could have foreseen. France has got some hard times coming. Okay. What was the Ancien regime? In 1789, France, like the rest of Europe, clung to an outdated social system that had emerged during the Middle Ages. Under this system, the Ancien regime, or Old Order, everyone in France was divided into three social classes, or estates. So there's our answer. It's the Old Order, where everyone was divided into three social classes. Sorry about that. France is divided into three social classes. Okay. And the next question is, what were the three estates? What were the three estates? So we're going to find that. The first estate was made up of the clergy. The second estate was made up of the nobility. And the third estate comprised the vast majority of the population. We're going to add some notes to what that means, clergy, okay, in case we're not sure. Instead of nobility, I'm going to say nobles. And the third estate is everyone else. Everyone else in France, or nearly everyone else. It doesn't include the king, but the third estate was everyone else. And we're going to add on here, the clergy were people who worked in the church. Okay, so these were church officials. The nobles, as I've already said, they were landowners and government officials. They were people who had been granted titles and lands by the king. We'll get into that here with question number 3, but I wanted to show you guys that in the reading. So the clergy, during the Middle Ages, the church had exerted great influence throughout the Christian Europe. Okay, they still enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege. So the clergy is the church officials. Okay. The second estate was the titled nobility of French society. Okay. Many of them had land. We remember from our earlier packet that they were landowners. Question 3 asks us, what had they done during the Middle Ages and how had they become nobles? Right here, zoom it just a little bit. Right here, the second estate was the titled nobility of French society. In the Middle Ages, noble knights had defended the land. Okay. in the 1600s, Richelieu and the King of France's grandfather, Louis XIV, had crushed their military power, but had given them other rights under strict royal control. Okay, those rights were rights like top jobs in government, the army, the courts, and the church. So, how had they become nobles? Well, they had defended the land. They defended the land, and in return, they had their military power taken from them, but then they were given extra rights and privileges by the king. Okay. Let's scroll down a little bit here. Because the third estate was made up of three parts, and we need to know what they are, what they were. First of all, the third estate is vastly diverse. The third estate was the most diverse social class. So remember, France divided into first estate, that's the church people, the second estate, the nobility, and the third estate, which was everyone else. But everyone else was a big group of people, and it was diverse. There was lots of different kinds of people within this third estate. At the top of the third estate were the bourgeoisie, okay, or the middle class. This included bankers, merchants, and manufacturers, doctors, lawyers, journalists, professors, okay? So what were the three parts of the third estate? The first part at the top were the bourgeoisie. And I'm going to go ahead and make notes here. I think you guys should make notes of what bourgeoisie is. These are bankers, lawyers, and it's merchants. And it said manufacturers, but what that means is that they were factory owners. I mean, factories weren't a thing like modern factories, but there was manufacture of goods. There was things being made by people, and the business, they were business owners. The business was owned by the bourgeoisie. Scroll down here, we'll learn a little more about the third estate. I gotta clear this. It's making me nuts. The bulk of the third estate, it says up here, consisted of rural peasants. The bulk of the third estate consisted of rural peasants. Well, what's a rural peasant? Let's read down here what that means. So some were prosperous landowners who hired laborers to work for them, but others were tenant farmers or day laborers. Rural peasants were country folk, mostly farmers. Go over here. So we've got our bourgeoisie. We've got rural peasants, mostly farmers. These people mostly grow food with their hands. And then at the bottom of this, oh, that's the wrong button. At the bottom of this social hierarchy were the poorest members of the third estate. The poorest member were urban workers. Okay. They were urban workers. And if you worked in an urban environment, if you worked in a city, that meant that you were probably a factory owner. Sorry, a factory worker. You were factory workers or servants, or you were unemployed. And these were the three parts of the three estates of the third estate of France. So I want to make this clear. So you've got first, second, and third estates, right? But the third estate can be divided even further into these three parts. Okay. Oh, geez. I put this all in the wrong place. Okay. The three parts of the third estate. Sorry, guys. Not trying to make this confusing. Not paying attention. Yeah. Of course, we define the bourgeoisie. These were factory owners, right? Many members of the bourgeoisie, by the way, were actually quite wealthy. Okay. Some of them were even more wealthy than the members of the second estate. But that wasn't enough to make them members of the second estate. To be a member of the second estate, you had to be granted that title by the king, just like we had learned here in question 3. So I'm going to clear my drawings. Scroll down. Next, it asks us, what does bourgeoisie mean? Well, let's find it. Probably have to go back a little bit in the text. At the top sat the bourgeoisie, or the middle class. So bourgeoisie means middle class. Bourgeoisie is the middle class. That's the factory owners of France. That's the business owners. Business owners, bankers, etc. And we already wrote that down, but I thought it would be worth putting down here as well. We need to really understand the difference. Bourgeoisie, some of them were quite wealthy, but they were still lower class. They were what we might call new money. They were people who had earned their money rather than inherited their money. So I'm going to read into the textbook a little bit here. We're going to talk about Jacques Necker and where he came from and where he went. Economic woes in France added to this social unrest and heightened tensions. One of the causes of the economic troubles was a financial crisis that was due in part to years of what's called deficit spending. Basically, the government had spent more money than it took in. Louis XIV, the Louis XVI's grandpa, had left France deeply in debt. He spent money on the 7 Years' War and on the American Revolution. Okay, costs of goods had risen. We talked about this already in the crossword that we did. But half the government's income from taxes went to paying the interest on the enormous debt. Basically, the French government had run up their credit card bill quite a bit, and they were having a hard time paying that down. It was too much. They couldn't pay it down. They weren't earning enough. To solve the financial crisis, the government was going to have to increase taxes or reduce expenses or both. However, the nobles and the clergy fiercely resisted any end to their exemption from taxes. So they really were not going to pay taxes. They were crazy serious about that. The heirs of Louis XIV were the wrong people to solve the economic crisis. Louis XV, who ruled in between, he ran up even more debt. Louis XVI, the current king of France during the French Revolution, was well-meaning, but he was weak and indecisive. He did, though, choose a financial expert, Jacques Necker. Necker urged the king to reduce the spending of the government, abolish some tariffs on internal trade, and Necker proposed taxing the first and second estates. He was going to start to tax these people who had always enjoyed not being taxed. And when he did this, the nobles and the clergy forced the king to dismiss him. Okay? So they forced the king to dismiss Jacques Necker because he was trying to tax them. He wanted to tax the first and second estates. So what we're seeing here is the beginning of the French Revolution, all this money problems. This was a power struggle between the king and the nobles. Okay. The nobles really did not want to pay taxes. They wanted the king to kind of take responsibility for this. And um, I mean, when France was in debt, France had all this money trouble. The money that the country of France, the kingdom of France, the money that they mostly owed it to the nobles and the clergy. That's who they had borrowed the money from. So they fought this war with money borrowed from the nobles, and the nobles say, well, you're not going to tax us to get this money back. No, you need to tax the third estate. And that's what sets up this whole big argument. So who demanded that the king call the Estates General? As the crisis deepened, the pressure for reform mounted. The wealthy and powerful classes demanded that the king summon the Estates General. So it was this first and second estate. They demanded that the king call this meeting to solve France's money problem. First and second estates wanted to get this meeting together. Yeah. And the reason they wanted that is they wanted to form a decision to tax third estate even more. They wanted to raise taxes and avoid paying themselves. So the whole thing was this power struggle for the first and second estates to avoid paying for France's money problems. And the French kings had not called the Estates General for 175 years. We need to know why. It's probably hinted at pretty strongly here. The French king had not called the Estates General for 175 years because of fear that the nobles would use it to recover feudal powers that they had lost under absolute rule. To reform-minded nobles, the Estates General seemed to offer a chance for them to carry out changes like those they had seen in England. They hoped to put the monarch under the control of the nobles and guarantee their privileges. So it was from fear that nobles would use it to regain their power. Power that they had lost under his grandpa, Louis XIV. And I should say, or even put the king under nobles' control. The nobles really wanted to be calling the shots in France, and this was their power grab. They saw that France had all this money trouble, and that if they could convince the king to assemble the Estates General, that they could vote and give themselves more power, and the power to basically say, well, we're in charge of deciding how much the third estate pays in taxes. And that's what sets up this whole argument. So how did the third estate want taxes to be counted? I'm going to put this back up there, actually. How did the third estate want votes to be counted in this Estates General? We'll flip over here and we're going to see. So Louis XVI calls the Estates General. The estates prepare grievance notebooks. I kind of skipped over this part with us, but basically they put together a list of what the problem was. Okay. Delegates take tennis court oath. So delegates to the Estates General from the Third Estate were elected. The only propertied men could vote. So the delegates were mostly lawyers, middle-class officials, and writers. So they were the bourgeoisie. They had read Voltaire, Rousseau, and other philosophes. They went to Versailles not only to solve the financial crisis, but they went with the intention of insisting on reform. They wanted a new way of doing things in France. When the Estates General convened in May, from the start, these delegates were deadlocked over the issue of voting. Traditionally, each estate had met and voted separately. Each group then brought to the assembly one vote. Under this system, the first and second estates always seemed to outvote the third estate, 2-1. This time, the third estate said, no, we're not doing this. We want all the estates to assemble together and meet in a single body, and each of our votes be counted by head. So they wanted each vote to count. They wanted to vote by head, where each person who showed up at the meeting got a vote, rather than each of the groups getting a vote, each of the classes, the estates, getting a vote. So they assemble, they call themselves the National Assembly. They say, well, we're the third estate. We don't need these other two estates to help us make decisions anyway. We're going to change things. The king responds by getting troops ready to force them to stop meeting. Okay, they swore their tennis court oath. They're full on radical at this point. After weeks of stalemate, the delegates of the Third Estate took a daring step. In June, they claimed to represent the people of France. They declared themselves the National Assembly. A few days later, they found their meeting hall to be locked and guarded. Fearing that the king planned to dismiss him, the delegates moved to a tennis court and swore the tennis court oath. They swore to never separate until they had written a new constitution for France. Okay. When some of the nobles and the clergy joined the assembly, Louis XVI accepted it grudgingly, but he gathered troops to stop the meeting. That was his idea. But on July 14th, a couple of months, into this, the city of Paris took the spotlight from what was going on at the meetings in Versailles. The streets buzzed with rumors that royal troops were going to occupy the city and try to control Paris. More than 800 Parisians assembled outside the Bastille, a grim fortress used as a prison for political and other prisoners. The crowd demanded weapons and gunpowder that they thought was stored there. The commander refused to open the gates and instead opened fire on the crowd. In the battle that followed, many people were killed. The enraged mob did break through the defenses. They killed the commander and 5 guards. They released some of the prisoners who were held there, but there actually weren't weapons. The results of the storming of the Bastille were not a military victory, but a symbolic one. The Bastille was a symbol of the power of France. Storming and fall of the Bastille was a wake-up call to Louis XVI. Unlike any other riot or short-lived protest, this event was a challenge to the sheer existence of the regime. It posed a challenge to the existence of the ancien regime, this old way, these 3 estates system. It was different. Storming the Bastille was a wake-up call. It was a new day in France. The people were angry and they had attacked the old way. Okay, guys. I hope you guys got from that reading what I intended. I really wanted to call special attention to this middle part where um, the king was forced to call the Estates General by a group of people who really they wanted to use it to gain more power for themselves. It was the nobility of France fighting with the king over who was in charge that sort of got things started. And in the middle of their squabbles, they made the mistake of asking the common people of France to come to a meeting. When the common people of France came to the meeting, they said, enough of this. We're not listening to you anymore. And now things are off the rails. Okay. We'll pick this up with the next section of the textbook here. It's called The French Revolution Unfolds. We'll talk about how these events progress forward, probably in the next lecture.